I thought I'd chat, really, rather than talks and lectures sound a bit formal, don't they? I'd go through one or two things that I'm concerned about. What I try and do is link it to this week. So people always say, what are you going to talk about? I nearly always say, I have no idea until I get to the week, because there's always something in the week which links to what I want to say, and there's a massive amount this week, actually today, and I'll come to it in a minute. But I also want to just say that if I talk for roughly 40 minutes, if I go over, I shall get shoes thrown at me from down there, and because I want to allow a bit of time for you to ask any questions you want to ask. I'm not going to do a resume of every case I've ever done. If you want to know about cases I've done, I will talk about them if you want me to, but basically they're all in a book. I did my memoirs, or rather Yvette did my memoirs. Her memory is better than mine, but a couple of years ago, so it's out there and it's all in paperback now. You can get 2 for the price of 1. Amazon today. I nearly brought some today because I've got lots left over. But anyway, true, yes. So but I haven't. But anyway, if you see it somewhere, and you want a quick read, it is a quick read, but it gives you a pretty good resume of things I've done over the last 40 years. However, I wasn't going to do that, but I thought if you want to ask questions, I can answer them. But the thing is, what I'm not allowed to do, and I think there are 1 or 2 barristers in the audience will know, there is a professional rule. I don't particularly think it's a brilliant rule, but there we are, it's there. I'm not allowed to talk about any case I'm currently involved in. Now, I'm involved in 2 big ones. I'm doing Duggan at the moment, which is the man who was shot by the police 2 years ago, led to national riots at the end, but certainly some in London. So I'm doing that at the moment. That's an inquest. It'll come to an end in about a month's time. But I'm doing a bigger one than that as well. That's Hillsborough. I'm representing most of the families in the Hillsborough inquests, which start next spring. Now, I can't really answer questions on either of those in the kind of, how's it going, and all that kind of thing. I can't do that. Solicitors can, but I can't. But I can answer any other questions on any other case. But Hillsborough, I can say this as a kind of introduction, really, because I couldn't remember what I said to Jill about what I was going to talk about. I think I said reliability of evidence. I think I talked about the rule of law. I think I talked about legal aid. Anyway, they all come together in a sense because you're all, maybe not all investigators, but you're all interested in investigation. You're all interested in the search for truth, and you're all interested in how you get there and how you establish it. And I appreciate, it's not an easy task. I often say to people, how do you know when someone's telling you the truth? And how do you know? And of course the courts rely, as you may be only too well aware, and that's the fuss with Ken Clark, Burkers, Hajibs and all the rest of it, on demeanour of somebody, how they look, how they react, their body language. Now that is a factor, but I think the courts have relied too heavily on that because professionals, police officers, I don't know how many in the room, but police officers are professionally doing a job in the courts as well as outside, and they're good at giving evidence, but they can be very good at not telling the truth. I mean, some of them do. I'm not saying every police officer tells lies. All I'm saying is they're professional witnesses, and they know, and now, of course, there are training schemes for police officers. In fact, sometimes they bring the trainers with them to court. I know essentially which cases they're doing it, because the next witness is going to say something different to the one before because somebody spotted where it's going wrong. So they have training now. The average person doesn't have that. And of course their body language can be quite the reverse, and you get the wrong impression because maybe they're not articulate, maybe they make mistakes, they're inconsistent, whatever. And I found that it's very, very difficult, whether it's a client or whether it's a member of the public or whether it's a jury, to know exactly what is going on in the mind of someone else. So it's a package that you really need. You need much more than the body language. So I think the courts are beginning to realise that they can't just trust body language. But just coming back to Hillsborough for a minute, I'm not talking about the merits of the case. I'm not talking about what is going on at the moment, because I can't do that. But I do want to just say a word about a 23-year search for the truth in their case. because that's what it was, 23 years. And the way they've begun to unravel it is, in fact, not because the system itself within which we all work offered it up, coughed it up, revealed it. And that's the anxiety I think a number of us have working in the system, that the system doesn't have within it a process of self-analysis. At the end of the day, it is dependent on people like the Hillsborough families to bring it out for you and for me, because they persist. There are many, many other families that go before them, and I'm sure you're aware of all the other ones. I mean, the Lawrences are another lot. Eileen Delalio, for sports people, will remember the Marchioness in London particularly. So there are lots and lots of families. You tend to forget in the midst of time that they get forgotten, but they are the ones who've said, we are going to pursue what we understand to be the truth, and they often have a much clearer vision. They're often much more committed, and they often stick with it. And the difference between now and when I started 40 years ago is the movement towards truth has grown enormously. Not by the system. The system resists at all stages, puts up hurdles, makes it difficult. But actually the families, the victims, the friends, whatever, ordinary people, sometimes it's lone figures who've said, we see where the vulnerability is and we want to make a difference. And of course, Delalio, River Safety, made a difference. Lawrence, police integrity, made a difference. Still making a difference. Hillsborough, of course, we've got to wait for the end. But all I wanted to say in their case was that the system rejected them at all levels. At the inquest level, at the inquiry level, at the appeal court level, and so on. The system failed them until it finally there was a moment of truth for a Labour MP who went to address the Hillsborough families 3 or 4 years ago, Andy Burnham, in front of a mass audience of, I don't know, must be 70,000. They were just about to have a match. And he addressed them, and he said, you know, how much he felt for them. There was silence in the stadium, but one voice said, just one person said, what about justice for the 96 victims? And suddenly the stadium came alive with a simple chant, justice for the 96. And I think he was so affected, well, he was so affected, it's all on film, I think it's on YouTube. You can see that he became actually completely, rather like the road to Damascus, he became changed. He realized he was facing something, he had to do something about it. And that led to an independent panel being set up. It led to disclosure. It led to the panel bringing out a report a year ago, and that report leading to the proceedings I'm now involved in. So a remarkable voyage, which has by no means finished, of course, by those families. And really what I try to say to people is, you can do the same, if you want to, about things that matter. And actually the need is even greater. Now what I want to do is just pause for a moment and stretch into territory which you may find interesting. Oh, actually, I looked to see if it was in the Evening Standard, and I saw hot, ready and legal. Well, that wasn't what I was looking for. In fact, it's about a top barrister spotted on a date with George Clooney. Ooh, yes, I'm looking to see who the top barrister is, but anyway, never mind. I was looking to see if there was anything in there about what's been happening today. Now, I don't know how many people are really alive. I'm sure in this educated audience there's loads of people who know what's going on today. But there is a first that's happening today, has been happening today. It was only going to be 90 minutes. It's not very long to search for the truth. But anyway, I suppose it's a start. It's the first time the Intelligence and Security Committee have given evidence in public. And the three heads of the intelligence agencies, GCHQ, MI5, MI6, were all going to be called to account. I'm not sure whether that's what's happened. There's not a word about it in there. Maybe I thought it was going to be a blank page and it all been redacted. I understand it is going to be broadcast, but again, there's going to be a 3-minute, or on the live feed, I think there was a 3-minute gap so they could cross stuff out. It may be on the news tonight. I have no idea. I'll be very interested to see how it's reported. Now, the Intelligence Security Committee is headed by Sir Malcolm Rifkind, who has in fact been extremely defensive and protective of the security services. So I'm not expecting penetrating questions. On the other hand, the world is watching to see whether he's able to reconstitute and reinvigorate confidence in what has been going on. And what has been going on affects all of you, especially in your business, actually. And certainly affects me in all aspects of our lives, but certainly in business life. And you've obviously picked up on it because it's been in all the newspapers, and in particular it's been in The Guardian. They've been in the forefront of trying to expose what's gone on. And it all traces back obviously to Edward Snowden, but long before that as well. People have been blowing the whistle a bit, but he's blown it big time. And what he's revealed is a situation about which you, as individuals, should be extremely worried. It's not about, that's how they peddle it, it's not about the whole business of terrorism and protecting our livelihoods and our way of life and our democratic society. It's not about that. In fact, that's the front. But what's actually been going on behind the scenes is mass surveillance of digital communications. Every single digital communication is being stored. It's not all being monitored in the sense of some poor person is having to go through it. They don't have to. They've got a machine will do it anyway. So they're looking for keywords. So they know what they're looking for. And of course, the security services have a remit, which I'm sure you're aware of. I mention it because some of you are in the business. The economic well-being of the nation. Now, what does that mean? They're entitled to look at anything that connects to not the security of the nation, but the economic well-being. It's an interesting phrase. The remit. Now, if you look at the breadth of the programs, that's PRISM in the United States and an equivalent one that is has been launched here, where they're actually going into Google cables, the pro-optic cables that go underneath the sea, effectively, without Google's permission. So they're looking at vast array of stuff. And what Snowden was really saying was, as an operative in Hong Kong or wherever he started off, he could basically press one button and up it all comes. Information that is being shared about you with the United States as well as other major countries, but mainly US, UK. Now this is concerning that they have that ability, and some lawyers here are now saying, we feel that our ability to give advice, our ability to have any kind of privacy, whether it's in the criminal arena, i.e. people defending in criminal cases, or in the commercial field, giving advice, is open to abuse. And one's not saying it's happening every day, but if you get, as we've had, Angela Merkel's phone mobile, Angela Merkel's phone, what conceivable justification have they got for that? Over 10 years they've admitted? No wonder she's not talking to Obama. And it's not just her. 35 world leaders have had their mobile phones monitored. That's the tip of the iceberg about which we have to have extra vigilance. And what interests me is that funnily enough, I've been to this building before, at least twice, to do conferences in front of the security services and police services who work in this field. And I'm there really to ask them to ask questions about themselves that they might not ask, and I've chaired the meetings as well. And obviously the things said in it, I can't reveal all the things said. I'm not going to do that. But what interested me was there really was a kind of acceptance of the way things were. Now, one of the things I want to just raise with you, so you recognize why what happened today should have been penetrating. They should have been asking about transparency. They should have been asking about accountability. They should have been asking about how it is that these programs, PRISM and so on, had not been made known. We have commissioners on your behalf looking at security. Supposed to go into the security service, ask the questions. Well, what this committee, since its inception in 1994, the committee itself, so we'll see today, has failed. After the Iraq War, they asked for a report. It failed to bring up any intelligence about the dodgy dossier. And may I just say for a moment, what's happened to Chilcot? Anybody know? I've asked this question innumerable times in public, hoping that somebody will say, yeah, that'll be a security service agent, so I then can identify who they are. What's happened to that? A lot of public money was spent on that. A lot of time was spent on that. He finished the job 2 years ago. Where's the report? Well, there's a very small paragraph in today's Guardian. I couldn't believe that I'm coming here tonight, and here's the answer. Guess who's stopping it being published? Because of what it's going to say about a decision, which I've always said was illegal, taken by Tony Blair. It's this government are saying to Chilcot, we prohibit you from disclosing 200 communications between Bush, Blair and Brown about conversations leading up to the war, cabinet minutes and so forth. He's not allowed to disclose them. He's saying, but I can't do the report without all this material. Because they call it Maxwellization. What it means is that before you finish a report, you have to say to anyone you're about to criticize, would you like to have a look at it? It's a very gentlemanly, you know. And if the person says, oh, I don't like that comment, you know, they go, all right, well, amend it then. Tell me what you want me to say about you. Anyway, that's what goes on. But, you know, it's built in as a fair or a fairness dimension to it all. And he can't do that because he can't actually deal... Of course, who's the main person in the frame? It's Mr. Blair. So basically, he can't, and I know what he wants to do, because we've seen the public hearings, and I followed them for, at the time they happened. He said some very inconsistent things about what he was told and so on. And so, until this, so it's this government, and I'll come back to this government in a moment, in relation to all these matters, saying no, can't do it. And it was this committee sitting today who failed to bring out the intelligence in 2003. They were the committee that also denied rendition. You know, you think it's some kind of song. Rendition, no, no. Jack Straw was another one. No, no. Don't know about that. They denied it, in fact. And Kim Howells, at the time, who was a Labour minister involved in this committee, said, no, we've been shown absolutely everything and there's not a sign of it. Didn't take too long, about a year, they discovered, in fact, they hadn't been shown everything. And David Miliband had to make a retraction on behalf of the committee. Actually, yeah, we were involved in rendition, illegal. Now, you know, these are just examples of what's been going on, and it goes through to torture. Well, that matters to me. I think any civilized society shouldn't engage in torture and shouldn't be involved with anyone else who is, and shouldn't actually be using the product of torture, which is what the governments have been saying time and time again. However, and they denied any involvement until Binyam Mohammed came along, and then it was exposed that there had been collusion. Just as there's been collusion between the Americans and the British over GCHQ, the Americans have been putting money into GCHQ. And why have they been putting money into GCHQ? Because GCHQ have been saying, actually, we've got a very light touch oversight here. And it's much easier for us to get away with this kind of thing, which is what Rifkin was originally saying. No, you can all rest assured, rest easy in your beds. Now, I want to read something that is in The Guardian today because I think it's extremely important. And I never expected to see it put in this way. But the gentleman who is responsible for the World Wide Web, in a sense, Tim Berners, gave an interview with The Guardian today, or maybe he gave it yesterday, but it's printed today. And he has heavily criticized the cracking of encryption. In other words, this is not just to do with, you know, your heavy crime and your terrorism. This is just a general procedure in which they, in his view, they have destroyed the security of the web for the benefit of the terrorist, if that has to be done. Because one of these three security agencies were blaming The Guardian for being a gift to terrorists. It's the other way around. It's the governments who are breaking, especially the Americans. And this is what he said. The cracking of encryption on ethical grounds he objects to. And then what he says is these are his exact words. Any democratic country has to take the high road. It has to live by its principles. I'm very sympathetic to attempts to increase security against organized crime, but you have to distinguish yourself from the criminal. Now, I think that's a very poignant point, because all he's saying is what's happened over this is that people like Snowden and others are being pursued as criminals. The Guardian is being pursued as a criminal. Cameron's saying, yeah, we need an inquiry over the Guardian and what it's done. The Guardian had to allow the intelligence services into its premises and destroy the original data that they had. Meanwhile, they'd passed it to the New York Times anyway, so they're publishing it in America. So this is a situation in which a major national newspaper is being heavily criticized for what it's doing. And maybe, I don't know, I hope it doesn't end up with charges in the same way as another case that's going on this week. Miranda. Now, Miranda is a colleague, essentially, not exactly of Mr. Snowden, but he was a colleague of another journalist who was providing information to The Guardian. He came through Heathrow Airport and he was arrested under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act. Had nothing to do with terrorism. They've admitted that, in the sense they're not saying he's a terrorist. And the case that's going on at the moment in the courts is challenging, he's in Brazil now, but he's challenging after a 9-hour, 12-hour detention, which was, he's saying, completely unlawful. He's challenging the use of that statute against him. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment. Now, you've got the gist, you've got the picture. Now, what I want to do, and I'm doing this I'm really apolitical about this. I'm not particularly in favour of any of the parties, to be perfectly honest. They're all much of a muchness. As far as I'm concerned, they're all about as guilty as each other for doing things which... And I'm concerned about civil liberties. I'm concerned about your integrity as people, as individuals, and for the kind of battles that I've fought for. Well, now, I have here, and I don't have it, I don't take it everywhere. Did anybody ever read the coalition agreement that they made? I often ask this and people go, what? Well, there was an agreement? Well, I've got it here. I think before you vote, if you vote, next time, I'm not saying you shouldn't vote, well, I'm just saying some people are getting fed up with the ballot box, but before you vote next time, just have a look at what they said, only a couple of years ago, that they were going to do. Now, as far as civil liberties is concerned, and this is a document they headed as Freedom, Fairness and Responsibility. That's how they call it. And then you get to a chapter which is headed Civil Liberties. And this is what they say about it. And then I just want to pick up some points and you'll see what a load of nonsense. I'm afraid it's vacuous. I mean, I suppose you would say, well, wait a minute, do we ever believe anything a politician says? Still less in a manifesto. Well, I don't want to be that sanguine, but maybe we have reached a position where there's not a single word that they say is worth the paper it's written on. Never mind, the airtime it takes up. This is how it's introduced. We will be strong in defence of freedom. The government believes that the British state has become too authoritarian and that over the past decade it has abused and eroded fundamental human freedoms and historic civil liberties. We need to restore the rights of the individuals in the face of an encroaching state power in keeping with Britain's tradition of freedom and fairness. Right, well, those are grand words, and then they actually have a 10-point plan. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole of the 10 points. So far, 7 have been demolished. In other words, they haven't kept any of them. There's 3 left where they might make it, if they make an effort, in the run-up to the next election. Now, these are the ones, and in the light of what I've described, only briefly, that is, mass surveillance and e-communications available to the security services and unaccountability. We will extend the scope of the Freedom of Information Act to provide greater transparency. No, they haven't done that. Because, of course, the Freedom of Information Act always has a little in the national interest proviso, so that if you're wanting information, it's really rather difficult to get it. So that one hasn't come about. Then they've got another one, to protect the freedom of speech. Well, you've seen, I've just been through the encroachments that are already there in relation to what various journalists want to do. And we will introduce safeguards against the misuse of anti-terrorism legislation, which of course has just happened with Miranda. That's just one example. We will further regulate CCTV. No, quite the opposite. We will end, now this is interesting for some of you here, we will end the storage of internet and email records without good reason. Well, that's an understatement of the century. But then we get to the bottom, and what they're saying is they're going to have an initiative, they say, effectively, to build on all our obligations under the European Convention. In other words, ensuring that these rights that we have under the European Convention are enshrined in British law. And what are they doing about that? What is May, Home Secretary? What is the Justice Secretary saying? They want to withdraw altogether from the European Convention. It's a complete nonsense. Because actually, rights to life, what other kind of right to life are they talking about? Has the British got a different right to life to the rest of the world? When you begin to think about it, it doesn't have any roots anywhere at all. It is a kind of we hate Europe situation. We're not having anything to do with Europe. And of course it confuses people because human rights in Europe haven't come out of the European Commission. They've come out of the Council of Europe. And who set that up? Actually, some rather famous Tories after the last war. Sir Winston Churchill and Maxwell Fyfe both set it up in the first place. So they don't even remember their own history. So I find it very, well, disheartening is an understatement, that we're living in a time and a place where people have forgotten what has happened before. And of course, if you forget the lessons of history, you might be condemned to relive them. So we need to just keep our eye on that ball before you start voting next time round. And this is only, as it were, one chapter in here. There's plenty more in here. And, you know, fees and all the rest of it, you know, for education. I don't know how many U-turns. It's just loaded, peppered with them. So actually, I find this whole document has been a disgrace. That wonderful they agreed it, so they form a government, and then they don't carry it out. Now I'm going to move from that arena, because those are all things happening this week. Watch the news tonight, see what the IRC have come up with. There's another area happening this week, which I also find disheartening. Because what's happened to this person could happen to you. And all these things matter. It's the only way you get people to, as it were, react. It's to say, it could happen to you. In other words, the kind of liberties we're talking about are indivisible. It matters to all of us, wherever it's happening, whatever's happening. Now, Andrew Mitchell. You're probably bored to tears with Plebgate, and I don't care what he said at the gate. It's not about that anymore. But the extraordinary thing is here is how it's happened. Just a few pointers. So the first thing, dispatches begin the process of unravelling it by showing that when the police say there was a whole crowd at the gates, they show the CCTV and there isn't a whole crowd at the gates. And then they say, oh, well, we had a complaint. Well, dispatches followed up the complaint. Did anybody see the programme? Fascinating. The person who wrote in lived in Ruislip. I don't know why I mentioned that, but, you know, that's how I remember it. And because Ruislip was actually a famous place for various spies at a previous age. So this gentleman living in Ruislip has written a complaint about what happened at the gates. So they track him down and they say, I'm not going to mention their name, and they say, so, you know, what was it like and so on, can you tell us about it? And he said, actually, I wasn't there. Oh, you weren't there. So why'd you write a complaint then? And so it goes on. And so he hasn't got too many explanations as to how he's written a complaint about something he wasn't even there for. So they do a bit of research into who he is and what he is. Initially, I think he denied even having any connection with the police. In fact, as it turns out, he has very strong connections with the diplomatic protection branch of the police. Actually, it's involved in Downing Street. Now, isn't that remarkable? No, it isn't, is it? No. Well, a year later, they've arrested 8 people. No one's been charged. Well, fine. They spent $144,000 on it. And we're still waiting to see whether there's going to be any accountability for this remarkable incident. But actually, what's happening this week is even more remarkable. Because, and it tells you the extent to which, you know, we have to be careful. Along comes Mr. Mitchell, and he agrees on October the 12th last year that he will go to his constituency office and, 5 minutes, and be interviewed by the Federation representatives of West Midlands, West Mercia and Warwickshire. So 3 fairly senior, detective sergeant, a sergeant and inspector, troop along, October the 12th last year, to really sort it out, you know, because here's a fairly senior Tory losing his job, resigning and all that. So they all sit down and they have a conversation, chit-chat, chit-chat. Federation representatives go outside and they say to the world at large, well, it's the credibility of the MP that's on the line, if you really want to know. They walk away. It's taken the IPCC and a number of other investigative bodies a whole year to look at this. And what Andrew Mitchell did, thank goodness he had the presence of mind to do it, he recorded the whole thing. It wasn't what the police said it was at all. That's what's been going on this week. But it hasn't quite finished. Because actually the interview shows that the credibility of the police was on the line. And of course there's a bit of credibility for the MP as well. But there's no way you listen to that interview and think that it's just the MP's credibility that's at stake. So the Home Affairs Committee, VAS and all the rest of it say they want the Federation representatives to come along and explain how it is that they've managed to mislead the world. Well, it gets worse. These 2, at least, of the 3 mislead the Commons Committee itself, which says this week, we want you back to apologise to us for misleading us last week. Well, we've now got a tier upon tier upon tier. Interesting, because this is what Keith Vaz had to say about this, if I can find the passage. And this is, I think you would all be of a similar view. He said, and he's talking about the committee as a whole, in relation to those 3 who gave evidence last week, we were appalled by the evidence given by D.S. Hinton, Sergeant Jones and Inspector McKyle. We have recalled them, that's 2 of them anyway, to correct the record, and if they do not, there will be a prima facie contempt of Parliament. Now that's going to be investigated. The IPCC are now opening another investigation into that. And then he went on to say, the narrative of what we have seen could rival any great work of fiction. At every point and at every level, instead of being transparent, we have uncovered a process that obstructs the truth. If this can happen to a cabinet minister, what hope is there for anyone else? I agree with him. And it's what I've been going on about most of my career, representing the little person rather than the big person. Because if they're prepared to do that at that level, for whatever political reason they had in mind, maybe they don't like Theresa May and they call her this woman. Or maybe they don't, which one of them did. Or maybe they don't like, Andrew Mitchell. Or maybe they don't like Tory policy, or the Federation's fed up with this, or they want more pay. I don't care what the reason is. There is no justification. And very interestingly, in the paper today, you see how much there is and how widely I read. It's in the Daily Mirror, in fact, but this one. And Andrew Mitchell's had an open letter from the, I think it's called the Justice and Truth Campaign for Orgreave. Yvette says, oh, I'll come to why in a moment. They've written to him saying, please support us. We're very pleased you've got an IPCC investigation into the whole thing, but certainly the most recent revelations, because we've been waiting actually rather more than 23 years for justice at Orgreave. The reason I bring it up is I represented the miners at Orgreave when a whole prosecution against actually hundreds of miners in the end collapsed. Why did it collapse? Because they weren't telling the truth. And why weren't they telling the truth? Once again, there was a political objective, just as there was over this. And the political objective then was to, crush what they saw to be the enemy within. Very simple. And lots of miners were devastated, physically devastated. But not a single police officer was disciplined, and not a single police officer was prosecuted for what happened there. A year ago, the IPCC were asked by this campaign, now is the time, on the back of Hillsborough, because it's the same police division, if you like, South Yorkshire, to investigate, to see whether there should be a reopening. It's taken them a year to get there. It's taken them a few days in Andrew Mitchell's case. So they were just making the point about this. And the reason Yvette went there, she made a very fine film. It's on her website if you want to see it, The Battle for Orgreave, which shows the truth about what happened. And interestingly, it's reaching the truth again, because what happened on that occasion was there were a few ordinary people. One of them was stuck up a tree with a camera, and the police didn't know it. And he got a very different view and a very different record of what was going on the ground right below him in terms of the kind of force that was being used against miners, most of whom, certainly at the bottom of the tree, were doing pretty well nothing except leaning up against the tree. And it's all there, it's all recorded. And nothing, no accountability in relation to that. And then you wonder what people in our democratic society are saying. What is it they mostly want? Certainly the people I represent. They're not actually wanting compensation. It's not about the money. It's about getting to the truth and about seeing that that truth is recognised. And that's what the Orgreave families wanted. That's what the Lawrence family wanted. That's what the Hillsborough families want. And one of the things I've been arguing for on the back of all this, and given what's been going on with the security services as well, I've been arguing for something called a truth commission. Now, other countries, there have been such things as truth, in the truth commissions. In South Africa, they had one during the transition between the apartheid state and Nelson Mandela. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission, slightly different, had other objectives. I want some kind of independent, permanent truth commission of the kind that led to the Hillsborough Report, chaired in that case by the Bishop of Liverpool, and a whole set of people who were quite independent of the police, quite independent of any vested interests, who came out with this remarkable, in my view, remarkable report, it was just saying, look, this is all the material we found. Now we've put it all together, these are the questions. And these are the questions that have got to be answered, and hopefully the inquest will answer some of them. And so I think we've got to a stage now, I don't know what you feel, I'll be interested to see what you do feel about this, wherein you can't depend on the system, you never could, but you certainly can't now, to produce answers in relation to these issues that are going to arise. And the biggest issue at the moment, I think, is the privacy issue over the security services and the trawling of information and the monopoly of information that is kept between departments, even then they're not supposed to share them. Now I'm going to finish with one other point I want to make because I feel very strongly about it. You can have all these wonderful ideas and you can have all these wonderful thoughts, but actually if you can't put them into practice, it's no use. And what's the biggest threat, I think, to the rule of law beyond Edward Snowden, but in the United Kingdom? The biggest threat is the reduction of public funding and access to the courts themselves, on the civil arena and in the criminal arena. The reduction is between 40 and 50% of public funding. It's going. Has already started to go. Now that's affecting the public across a whole myriad of things, from family law right the way through to housing and welfare benefits, and actually the sort of things that you're bothered about, daily things. You're not going to get representation unless you can pay for it. If you can pay for it, that's fine. One law for the rich and another for the poor. That's where we're heading. I started 40 years ago, and that's what it was like then. Legal aid only just came in then, after the war. It was supposed to be a pillar, one of the pillars of a new society. And within the European Convention, Article 6, fair trial, there is supposed to be free provision of funding in the criminal arena, but of course they're changing the threshold for that. There's supposed to be, again, free provision in the civil arena in relation to all these areas. Now what's happened is the providers have collapsed and are collapsing. Neighbourhood law centres, community law centres, high street solicitors. You try and find one that's doing criminal legal aid or civil legal aid. They don't want to know because they can't cope. They can't make ends meet doing it. So firms are just collapsing. And I finish on a personal note. I've had, well, you probably read it. I've had to basically close my chambers because we can't survive. And I've had to reinvent myself, which is, you know, not an easy task at this stage in my career, to reinvent myself in a different way so that we don't have fixed costs that reduce us to rubble. I've got to have low fixed costs, and we've got to be, well, I think The Guardian or somebody called it virtual chambers. Yeah, we exist, we've got a place, but actually to continue doing the job we've been doing, the only way we can do it is, you know, without the buildings, without all the trappings, and just get on with it. Which of course is what the government wants. They said, brilliant, that's what we need. Yeah, look at the toll it's going to take on those of us who are still trying to fight our corner. We have enough problems trying to survive tomorrow without the added burden of trying to present somebody's case. And I'm not going to read it now, I'm reading it to another meeting tomorrow. There's a judge in the family court, so it's never mind crime, who's just written this plea from the bench. He said, you know, I had this case, a divorce case, no representation on either side. I had no, you know, no presentation. I had no assistance from an expert because it involved Pakistani law. I had to sort out the bundles myself this morning, he said. I had to rummage through and find out where everything was. And instead of the case taking 20 minutes, which it would have done normally, it took me all day because I had to sort it out myself. Now that's the level we've got at. It's do-it-yourself justice. Do-it-yourself justice for judges as well as for you. So I hope you're not thinking of getting a divorce soon. Right, I'm going to finish there. Thanks. Well, I'm certainly in favour of press regulation. In other words, I think, well, just going back a step, I think the Leveson inquiry did quite a great service publicly to expose a level of collusion. And so that's one thing. And I think that people were, well, perhaps they weren't surprised by the extent to which there was, at a level, collusion between certain politicians, certain police officers, and certain tabloids. So that was instructive to see how that worked. And of course there are cases going on, so I can't say too much more about that. However, what he was trying to do was to say we can't have a situation which some of the press, particularly the Daily Mail, wanted, which is complete self-regulation, and they see it as an encroachment on their freedom to report X, Y, and Z in particular ways that they want to report it. So, and I don't think self-regulation is going to work, because particularly in cases I've been involved in, some press have behaved quite irresponsibly. The extent to which the press matters, I just want to put it in a context for a moment before we get to what can be done about it. You have to remember now, I'm not sure how important the press is anymore, because as far as I can see, they're actually, you know, they're losing money and they're going out of business. I mean, they're holding on. But actually, what is it that, not your generation, and certainly not mine, but 3 or 4 down, they're not bothering with newspapers. It's all online now anyway. And it's the internet, which is where there is almost untrammeled, unregulated dissemination of information that can't really be checked, so that you can have stuff being put on in Tokyo, even if you've got regulation here. So that's a slightly different question, but that's the context. So the press, in a sense, is only now a very small part. It once was the dominant force. I'm not sure that it is. However, I do think that, I'm not in favour of royal charters, but I do think that the government does have to impose a series of, if you like, parameters within which they have to they really have to operate, and they should be enforced. So you get the editors together. That's what we've been trying to do, is to get the editors together and agree on the parameters for progress. The problem is that some editors are not interested in any kind of regulation which they will dress up as being an encroachment of the freedom of speech. But I think it actually, at the end of the day, it's not rocket science. And Leveson actually came out with a blueprint. I mean, you may not agree with it, but that was a way forward. And so he's refused to speak publicly about it, because I think he doesn't want to get involved in the quagmire of, you know, who's right and who's wrong. But I think his, if you like, his charter of how to deal with it was the way forward. And it's very disappointing that they're not prepared to do it, because I think, in fact, what is going to come out in the trials that we're going to see from now on is really quite frightening. So that even with the restrictions that there were before about the various methods of obtaining information, they still were prepared to break the law and cover it up. So that's the difficulty. If you have a set of regulations, you have to then have an ability to enforce them. And in order to do that, you need to get inside the newspaper offices in order to see where it's come from. Just reading the article may be too late. And so you need to know in advance. But I think it's possible, and I think it has to happen. And Leveson, as far as he could, showed the way. I saw it. I thought he's starting. Isn't he? There's something today about that. Answer to your question, I thought brilliant. I have to say, brilliant. I don't. Well, I know lots of people say I don't watch much television. I watch a fair amount of television, but I think it was a Newsnight program, and I think we were both in, and there he was. And actually, I'm not a fan of Russell Brand, particularly, and he's done some pretty, you know, stupid things, and also, I think, irresponsible things. However, I thought the interview with Paxman, to see, because I obviously know Paxman a bit, is to see Paxman actually a bit call for words. And because he has the brilliance of saying, knowing that Paxman's about to leap in and saying, how you can say anything through that beard, dear. You know, and I think he sort of took the venom out of it, and I'm not saying he was being venomous. I thought he was expressing, for me anyway, all the things I've been saying over the past, certainly 30 years. And I think he's also expressing for a big public out there who are fed up. And when he was saying, what's the point of voting, he wasn't trying to be undemocratic. Paxman kept going on about, well, you've got to use the ballot box, we live in a democracy. He was just saying that the vote has become devalued, and we're living in a democratically bankrupt situation. That's my view. And so when he said that, I've never sat in front of a television and clapping, and I thought, who am I clapping? There's no one here. You know, well, and Yvette did as well. So the following week, I was at a meeting with somebody called Angela Davis, some of you may remember, a black activist from the States. And we were on the same platform at Birkbeck. And I used what he said. And of course, some of the women in the audience don't like Russell Brand because he's a misogynist, and he is. And he shouldn't have said those things that he has said in the past. But at the same time, there was a real reception there. People recognized that he'd got something. And I'm not testing who read the interview with me last weekend, but anyway, there was one in The Guardian. And I had a letter yesterday from somebody saying, great, you're the Russell Brand of the legal profession. I thought, yes, I finally made it. Bit late in the day. Anyway, so I'm in favour. I can't talk about the two cases except to answer your first point. Have you read the Hillsborough report? You haven't? Well, I think before you speak in public about it again, read it, because it's educational, instructive, and it's written by people who I suspect you would respect. So read that before you say anything more about that. Wait for the end of the inquest, and then, you know, we'll see what happens there. As far as Plebgate is concerned, I did introduce it by saying it's not about what was said at the gate. Actually, I don't care what was said at the gate. He might have said pleb, so what? I quite agree. That's not the point, is it? The point is, even over something like that, if you like, the panoply of investigative skills is suddenly devoted to a battle about this by the police trying to discredit the MP, and worse, actually, of course, is the consequential lies that have been told. Now, if you think that doesn't matter, then you're in the wrong camp. And if you say to Doreen, if she was sitting here now, and you said that to her, I think you'd want to run from the room, because, you know, she is one of those. I just cite her because she says, yes, a lot of money's been spent on the Lawrence case, and maybe people are fed up with hearing about it. But on the other hand, she's brought about change. And that's what I'm saying. These people brought about change. And it's taxpayers' money, yes, but how much of taxpayers' money has been spent on the Iraq War? How much money of taxpayers' money is being spent in ways in which I don't approve? So it's, you know, in fact, the quantity of money is minuscule compared to, I don't know how many bankers are here, bankers' bonuses. So, and here we have a government that's refusing to do anything about the bonus culture, and in fact is the only nation in Europe that's standing out and saying, this is George Osborne, taking Europe to court to say, no, no, we can't do that. We want, you know, we want deregulation in the city, because actually the only way we get people to come here and do work is because it's deregulated. That's exactly what they said about GCHQ. Sorry, not going to wear it. There is a way, there is another way, because some people say, well, yeah, it's all very well, everything. You say, where are we going to get the money? If they want the money to do something, whether it's Afghanistan or anywhere else, they get the money. And there are other ways of raising money, whether it's the FTT, you know, Robin Hood tax or whatever. There are other ways of raising money. So I'm not going to buy the thing that, you know, this is a large amount of money, that looking for the truth. The truth don't come cheap. And it's very, very important to maintain, if you believe that the rule of law is at the centre of our society, which I do, because otherwise, you know, what's the point? The rule of law is meant to be the cornerstone. And what underpins the rule of law? It's supposed to be, the politicians are supposed to be underpinning it, and of course we see many examples of how they break it, and so are the forces of law and order. Now, if there are cracks appearing, and that's the importance of what Keith Vaz was saying, that actually, finally it's getting through to those who are in governance, that it can't go on any longer, and there has to be greater protection. And what's interesting, I think, in the House of Commons is not actually what happens at question time. That's that's a circus every week. I think the House of Commons committees do an incredible job, undetected a lot of the time. When you finally get, you know, the cameras do get in there, and I'm in favour of cameras in court as well as cameras in the House of Commons, is when Keith Vaz gets going, you know, people start to sweat a bit. And you get people in public finding it difficult to answer the questions. And the same is happening in some of the other committees, as you've seen, public accounts committees and so on. We need something bigger than that. They're having to do it on the back of all the other work they're doing. So the committee structure in the House of Commons is beginning to take off. It's taken a long time. And that's because average MPs recognise that their constituents are saying, you know, where is the accountability in all this? So it's a long answer, but there you are. You can see what my answer is to spending money. Oh, to veil or not to veil? Right. Well, interesting question. Yes, I'm quite happy to answer that one. Because Kenneth Clarke is such an idiot. What's he doing? Talking about, you know, bags on heads. Interestingly, the first trial I had, God, this sounds like a real barrister, isn't it, going on? First trial I had to deal with the security services in the early days before anonymity. That is actually what they did do. They came in with brown paper bags and 2 slits. And the judge could not believe, you know, and actually found it rather... Have you ever tried speaking inside a paper bag? You know, you go... and you see the bags going like this. Anyway, they took them off, and they decided to have screens after that. That's in the early days. So coming up to present, I think, in fact, whilst I was saying you've got to be careful about body language and all the rest of it, I think it is important, in the context of a case searching for the truth, civil or criminal, that a judge should have a discretion, who's got control of the whole case, to decide whether this is a case when it matters. Now, it will matter if there's a jury. Not so often do you get juries in civil cases anymore, but you certainly get them in Crown Court crime. And actually it is quite difficult to make a judgment or make a relationship with somebody if you only see their eyes. Now, if you're accustomed to only seeing their eyes, I suppose those who do that would say, well, that's how we operate. But we're not accustomed to only seeing somebody's eyes and not the whole of the face. And I find it rather difficult to relate to that person. So I think, but not all cases require that. There will be cases where it's just a point of law. And so the demeanour or relationship with a witness or a defendant is not so important. Or even with a barrister, although that hasn't come up yet. But on other cases, clearly being able to, communicate in that way will be important, and the judge should have a discretion to make it essentially, one doesn't want to get into contempt of court situations, but to make an order of the court that the person shall, as it were, remove. And it's done in a civilized way through the lawyer and all the rest of it. So remove. So I'm in favour of people being able to see who you are when you're giving evidence. But I'm also conscious of the fact some cases don't need that, so they can continue wearing whatever their cultural... Like, for example, I mean, I don't think he's still around, but there was a Sikh judge who insisted on wearing his turban. Fine, I don't have a problem with that. And another one who insisted on carrying the ceremonial sword into court, which was an offensive weapon, or could have been anyway. And so, one has to make allowances, and I'm not trying to be super PC, liberal, whatever. I'm just recognising we're all pretty eclectic and different. But the point, you're quite right, the point at which you're having to make a judgment, you have to form a relationship, then I'm sorry, I want to see who it is I'm dealing with. So I hope that answers. Sorry, was there another bit to the question? Oh, I see, witness box or beyond. No, I think primarily it's the witness box. But I mean, there may be other situations in which, yes, absolutely. If you're sitting in judgment, so I wouldn't want a judge to come in. God, I'm in front of the appeal court tomorrow. I mean, if they all came in, and I could only see their eyes, I mean, it just wouldn't work. And the same with the jury, it wouldn't work. So those sitting in judgment, I don't think can do that. And those who are being judged, in some circumstances where they're having to give evidence, I think also need to be, full frontal in the sense that you need to see who they are. So, but outside that, but you then get into a situation, I haven't even dealt with it, and that is arbitration. That could be difficult there. So there'll be, again, you have to be discretionary and you have to look at each individual case. But as a principle, I think, yes, sorry, no hajibs or burqas. Sorry, the gentleman in front of you, you're getting up. I'll take this and then you can go. Well, okay, not a problem. I've never made a secret of the fact that I do support them. And who do they ask to their police colleges and their training courses? Me. And I go there because at the end of the day, I don't want vigilantes. I don't want you enforcing the law and taking it into your own hands. Fairly basic principle. What I'm saying is I want a responsible, accountable police force, and therefore they have to recognise where the cracks are, just as they've said there. They have to recognise that. And what I'm doing is I'm not saying every single police officer, but when you get to, let's say, institutional racism. I mean, Macpherson, for example, was a High Court judge who would have said, the same as you to me at the beginning of it, he would have said, you're very partisan. And he probably thought that. They all think that before they see that actually, I've got a broader spectrum than that. And I concentrate on where it's going wrong in order to put it right and get it right. The problem's been, it's been going wrong rather badly. So, in Macpherson's case, I think if he were sitting here, he would probably accept. He was so amazed at the extent to which errors, and worse, were made right the way through. I don't think he ever imagined that he, with his background, actually Scott's background, very strict, very authoritarian, very conservative. I'm not saying all Scots are like that. But, I better be careful, they won't let me out. And thank you very much for the whiskey. No, I'm just giving a description of him because he comes from that situation. And he saw how broad it was. And nobody imagined, least of all him, that he would be able to embrace all this with institutional racism. People go, what? The police as a whole were up in arms. How dare he? He's undermining the fabric of our society. He's undermining our morale. We do a good job. And all he was saying was actually, yeah, it's not that you don't do a good job, but you have to be aware. This originally was just a murder. But there were more senior officers attending this murder than I've ever seen in my life. Turned up for this ordinary murder. And the levels at which there were, how shall I put it, a little economic with the truth all the way through. Happened at Orgreave. It's happened on major occasions. And then you have to say to yourself, as Vaz was saying, if it can happen there and you peel it back, how often is it happening? That's all I'm asking. And they don't mind me asking it because they know that I usually press the buttons and then they run away and try and, I'm not saying run away, then they try and put it right. And they do. There's no question, as a result of Macpherson, there's a whole body of police officers that are really trying hard to make it work now because they recognise. But they're fighting inside the force to get it right because there are still residual areas where they say, oh, Macpherson, you know, or whatever. And we faced, I mean, I faced, and so has Dorian, on particular meetings, at New Scotland Yard, actual abuse that the officers didn't recognise was being heard by someone else who then reported it because they don't believe that the criticism is justified. They believe they're above the law. That's the problem. And all I'm trying to do with the senior officers is say, and the junior ones as well, is to say, you know, I am on your side, and I'm on your side because actually, if I'm not on your side, you've got problems. And they agree usually. So there we are. That's a very good question. Corroboration. Unreliable evidence by people across the board. In other words, it's not just police officers, scientists as well, giving unreliable evidence, social workers and so on. Unreliable evidence. And obviously in the mid-70s, 80s, it was confession evidence and so on. So my approach has always been is you obviously try and firm up and ensure that the people who are confessing are reliably confessing. The people who are reporting on experiments have their experiments verified by other scientists, so on and so on. But actually at the end of the day, and I'm the only one arguing this, I have to say, nobody else wants to know. In fact, what's happened is a complete relaxation. There used to be a rule that certain types of evidence were regarded as prima facie unreliable. Sexual offences came into that category, but there were offences which involved accessories and people who were giving Queen's evidence and so on. In other words, fellow criminals turning against you and so on. Various areas of evidence, the law said, right, you've got to have corroboration because. Now they've actually done away with it. So there's no legal requirement, there's actually no evidential requirement either. In other words, you can have situations in which the law says you have to have corroboration. In other cases, the law says it would be advisable to look for corroborations, but it's not obligatory. All of that's gone. And what I'm bothered about is that you can now have convictions based on a single strand of evidence. And that worries me, because single strands of evidence, whether they're scientific or any other kind, of course, increasingly now, since the confession evidence was seen to be unreliable, they're relying on forensic evidence. And the problem now is that the government's cutting all the funding to scientists. So you're not getting the same level of expertise with scientists corroborating each other. And so you're getting a mass of public funding going into the prosecutorial side, but very little going into the defence side. So, well, not as much. So you haven't got an equality of arms. So in that situation, it's absolutely vital that you have some other strand which a jury can say, or a judge, if it's judge only, can say, well, there's a confession, if there is, or there's a bit of DNA, because DNA isn't, you know, necessarily the end of the story, nor is fingerprinting. And of course we've been led to believe that that's sort of science written in tablets of stone and you can't alter it, but actually there's a lot of relativity, there's a lot of subjectivity, even in the field of science. And of course it's all in the book, so I've spelt out how that comes up. And therefore one of the protections against miscarriages was in fact to ensure corroboration. But politicians have gone the other way. So now you can just have one single strand. And I'm unhappy about that. I quite agree. There was a period at which, you know, if a woman was giving evidence in a sex case, the judges would, you know, automatically, when I first started, that's what it was like. You know, women were regarded as just totally unreliable when it comes to that sort of thing, and they were asking for it, that sort of thing. So, in sex cases. So, well, actually in other cases as well. Then there was the problem with children, and then you got Esther Ranson saying, wait a minute, a lot of children are telling the truth, you have to listen to their first accounts. So actually, it's opened up a situation in which now, you know, women are not regarded as unreliable. Children are not regarded as unreliable. However, and DNA evidence is not per se regarded as unreliable. My only point is, that's fine. That's how it should be. They're not prima facie unreliable. But in order to be sure, you don't want, I'm talking about criminal cases because it's different in the civil arena, you don't want a conviction, which may be very important, however little the charges. You don't want a conviction on evidence that the jury has had, unless they are sure. Now, how many have sat on a jury here? Any of you? Oh, well, you know what it's like to try and reach a verdict upon which all 12, and then in the end a majority of 10, can be sure if you're going to convict. And if I were on a jury, I would be wanting, even though the child was extraordinarily compelling, I would want to see if there's anything else. Now, I wouldn't make it obligatory. I wouldn't make it a matter of law that there has to be corroboration. I'd make it a matter of guidance from the judge saying, look, before you can convict on a single bit of DNA, you can convict on a child, you can convict on what this woman is saying happened, even though there's nothing else to back it up, even though there's no medical evidence. I've had cases like that. You can convict, but you might like to just step back a bit and think about, do you feel sure when there isn't anything else? Because the defence will have made this point in any event. So all he will be doing, she will be doing, is to back it up. So that would be my approach in the present situation. But actually the judges don't even do that now. Well, they sometimes do, but not as much.
Michael, I think it's most appropriate that you make the comment and give us a description about the Hillsborough and the lone voice. Because growing up, I've always seen you as being that lone voice, challenging the establishment, challenging the police. And it's very difficult to actually do that, and I admire you greatly for it.
Thank you.
On behalf of Haymarket and the staff and all the guests here, sincerely thank you for a fascinating, thought-provoking talk. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
Two more thanks, actually. I'd like to thank Yvette for the support. Thank you for including me. And before we all adjourn next door for drinks and refreshments, events like this don't just happen, of course. There's always people behind the scenes who are doing an enormous amount of work. And there's two people from Haymarket I particularly want to thank. One is Amy Graham. Amy. Phil Benson from Haymarket. And I think on that note, I think it's time for everyone to eat, drink and make merry next door. Thank you.
I've been working with Haymarket during their entire time of existence, and before that I was working with George with his time at Network. So all in all, I've had something like 20 years experience of George and Haymarket. BPP Construction Consultants is a firm of chartered quantity surveyors, and we use our skills of procurement, construction knowledge and costs of construction to identify potential areas of hotspots, if you like, of fraud that might be of interest to particular clients. We then use those hotspots in discussion with Haymarket to allow Haymarket to obtain the required evidence to take that issue to court. Over the last 15 to 20 years of working with George and Haymarket, we have identified substantial cases of construction fraud. With the assistance of Haymarket's evidence, that's led to the successful prosecution of either individuals or the recovery of misappropriated assets.
I've actually worked with Haymarket on a number of occasions. It's been fun. I think that's probably the best way to put it. We were doing a very detailed internal fraud, and it spun off into so many other directions. What I loved about Haymarket was that they were very focused and they kept us all on track. We actually finished up recovering 7 figures, and quite frankly, without Haymarket, we wouldn't have got there. So I'm jolly pleased with them.